Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed Live. I'm super excited to be here with you all today to kick off 2021 with some news about Azure SQL and SQL Server over the past few months. Now, this is our first time of 2021 and really ever doing this sort of live thing, so bear with us as we learn how to do this, but we're really excited. I have some special guests joining us today to give us a closer look at a few things, as well as some highlights on what's coming next. So I think this is going to be a really fun session. So, all right. So like I mentioned, we're going to be going live every week starting now until who knows when at 9 a.m. on Wednesdays. So be sure to tune in wherever you're tuning in from now or from Learn TV every Wednesday to get the latest. And we'll do different things each week. We're not going to bore you with the news every single week, but this week we're going to do the news, and in future weeks we'll cover other things. We have some exciting things coming in the future weeks for this month, which Marisa is going to tell you more about later. Now, the first thing that I want to cover, and we're just going to get right into it, is product updates. So, if I step back and think about what I want to cover in this news updates, we're going to talk about product updates, we're going to talk about blogs, we're going to talk about videos, we're going to talk about things you might have missed that you might also be interested in. And since it's the first episode, and I can't guarantee that I'll do this every episode, but since it's the first episode, I thought it would be cool to also include some demos. So we'll see how those go as well. Just taking a look back at December specifically, we did a live show, actually our first live show ever in December with the Azure SQL Managed Instance team. And you can see I got a lot of the Managed Instance program managers to come on the show and talk about Azure SQL Managed Instance. It was a really fun session. You can find the link for that in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. And another fun fact that you might not have known, because I haven't told you yet, is that each month when I release this news update, I'm also going to release a blog. So at 9 a.m., I believe at 9 a.m., the blog will go live, and I'll share a link to that blog at the end of the session. But all the things that you see here are going to be summarized in a blog that I post at the end of the session. So don't worry if you miss something or you want to go deep into something or you miss a link, it will be there later. All right, so what I want to start with is some of those updates from the Azure SQL Managed Instance team, just a few of them. There were a lot of them. You'll see this is just the first half, but a few things to cover is we started by talking about the compatibility and seamless migration capabilities that have been added over the past few months in Managed Instance. Now, all the updates you're seeing here for Managed Instance kind of comes into a culmination of what some people are calling Managed Instance 2.0, because there's so many new things that are supported. For example, we just announced support back in November for DTC. This is something people have been asking for a long time, and it's really helping in bringing Managed Instance that much closer to SQL Server as far as capabilities go. We also released the log replay service. So this is something that's going to help you do customizable migrations. This is some of the technology that powers the database migration service today, or log shipping capability. So this is something we're now kind of providing for you so you can kind of use it as you need it. We also announced new performance increases back at Ignite, but I wanted to call these out because they're really interesting, because basically you just woke up one day and your MI at the same vCore and levels that you were at before is just running faster and with higher performance. So that's a great one. It includes no cost to you. You just kind of get more for what you pay for right out the gate. Another thing we released recently was this idea of backup cost optimization. Now, there are a few pieces of that, but one I wanted to highlight was this idea of picking where your backups reside. Now, before this update, with Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance, your backups were automatically stored in geo-redundant storage, or GRS. Now, what this means is that your backups, when you deploy, are going to be in the region that you deploy, so for example, West US, as well as the paired region. So in West US case, that would be East US. Now for certain regions, that means your paired region could actually be outside of your country bounds. Now, some customers said, we want our data to reside in one country, so we don't really want this GRS. So we announced two new options, ZRS, which is zone redundant storage. So that's basically multiple zones within the same region, but they would be in separate data centers or separate buildings. So they have separate power, cooling, and water systems. And we also announced the ability for you to store your backups in locally redundant storage. So basically, it's all replicated locally. Okay, so that was really exciting. And then one other thing that happened in the live show specifically back in December is we got a really interesting demo that shows off the ability to do globally distributed applications. And this takes advantage of another new capability called global VNet peering. And this is something that recently became available for Azure SQL Managed Instance. In addition to that, we did some things around BCDR, or business continuity and disaster recovery. And like I said, there were a lot of updates that have come in the past few months. We have a whole other side of things related to security, being able to force things like TLS version 1.2, which definitely recommend doing if you aren't doing already today. And as well as for monitoring and manageability. So if you're a SCOM user, we recently released some management packs for you to use with Managed Instance. You can also now query log analytics from the portal, and you can do things like user-initiated failover. And this is really important because this is going to help you test your application resiliency. So if there's any blips in connectivity to your database managed instance, this is going to help you to be able to test that before it kind of happens in real life, but you can be prepared, because application resiliency, retry logic, all these things are super important when you move towards these cloud services. Some other things, just to name a few things in the service deployment and patching area, they talked about how managed instance today can take a few hours to deploy. And up until recently, a lot of times it was kind of a black box while you were deploying or scaling. So what we've added is some transparency, so you can see some of the options that are running behind the scenes, so you know what's going on. We're also working on making this process faster, and even introducing or announcing some sort of preview for maintenance windows. So kind of understanding when maintenance or updates are going to be applied to your managed instance. So that's a lot of updates. I know I said there were a lot, a whole hour's worth in that link that's in the slide you see there. Another cool thing about these live shows is that we have wonderful team members and producers like Marisa, who you'll meet later, who are actually time coding these things for you. So you can go back to this live show that happened in December, and you can just skip around if you want to learn just about user-initiated failover or some specific thing. You can skip around to see that part. You don't have to watch the whole thing. So that's pretty cool. All right, so on to the next update. And this is about machine learning on Azure SQL Managed Instance. Now, you've probably heard of this because this is like the when you think about in-database machine learning or machine learning services for SQL Server on-prem. It's been a while since 2016 and 2017. We got R and then Python in SQL Server. And now we announced in early December, so this is one I think you might have missed, we announced the general availability for R and Python in Azure SQL Managed Instance. So that's awesome. I've got some cool stuff I'm going to try to show you, and hopefully it all works out for me and for you so you can see it. But this is a great feature addition. Again, we're working really hard to close the feature gaps between SQL Server and Managed Instance. And you can see we've gotten pretty darn close in the recent 6 months. Now, since I mentioned this update, I thought it would be interesting to also call out, and in case you missed it, so that's that acronym there, but basically machine learning services in SQL Server today, if you think about it today or before this happened, we had a specific version of R and Python that you had to use. And so that could mean that we could be a couple months behind what the latest version is. So a few months ago, we actually open sourced for a custom runtime for R and Python. So this means you can kind of bring your own R and Python and specify the version that you want to use. So I think this is going to be big for folks. I know it's big for me. You want to go update your packages. Maybe you want to try something new, and potentially the other service is a few months behind. So this is kind of going to eliminate that challenge that you might have, and you can kind of bring your own version that you're using in your environment today. So that was a lot of updates. We've done a lot so far. Again, I'm trying to keep this exciting and interesting. So would love to hear your comments on what you've seen so far. If you have any questions, feel free to post a comment or a question wherever you're streaming this from, and we'll take a look at some that might have come in after we take a look at a demo. So I'm going to switch over to my virtual machine. I'm actually going to remove myself so we maximize our screen real estate. We're going to take a look at a demo. And actually, before we get into the demo, I changed my mind. I'm going to bring myself back on. I'm going to set the scenario, okay? So let's imagine a scenario where I am a DBA / data scientist / data engineer / whatever it is that I need to be on any given day. I think many of you can relate to this idea of wearing multiple hats. Now, in this scenario, I work for a company called AdventureWorks, and you've probably heard of them. They're a very popular bike company, hardware accessories company. They've been around for a long time, and they're completely fictitious. But let's say I work for AdventureWorks, and they are migrating to Azure SQL Managed Instance. Now, on top of migrating to Azure SQL Managed Instance, they're also using SSRS for various reports that they use. They're actually still using paginated reports. This is very common, and they actually print these out and take them to meetings, of course, when these meetings were happening in person, not today. But in this scenario, they're moving, they're trying to figure out what to do with the SSRS workloads, as well as trying to analyze the certain quotas that they have today. And I have some ideas for how we can use machine learning to make those a little bit better. So now, given that, I'm going to switch over and show you all this scenario. So one of the things that we announced relatively recently is this idea of a pre-built image. So in the marketplace, so that's basically the Azure Marketplace, we have pre-built images for you to use, which basically means they come pre-configured, they're pre-installed with the software that you need, and they're all up to date. So one example of this is for SQL Server reporting services for 2019. And you can see these images are relatively new, but you see we also have images for 2017 SSRS, 2016, and these are even newer. Even for SSAS, you can get these sort of images as well. Now, one of the cool things is you have some options. So for example, if I want to just deploy the specific version or edition of SSRS that I have onto a Windows virtual machine, I have that option. But if I'm also lifting and shifting my SQL Server on-prem to SQL Server in an Azure virtual machine, I also have that option here. So this basically means I'll get a prepackaged image or virtual machine with the latest CU on it for the given edition that I select, as well as SSRS already configured and ready to go. So these are just a few ways we're trying to make it easier for you to kind of move your workloads at whatever pace it is that you're moving to the cloud. So I've actually gone ahead and deployed that, and you can see I'm actually in that VM right now. So let's take a look at what I have. So this is my report server. You can see that I have a few report parts, a few paginated reports, and I also have a data source. Now, this is interesting, and this isn't super new, but maybe it's something you haven't seen before. I can actually set the data source for my SSRS to be a managed instance. So you can see here in SSMS, this AdventureWorks managed instance that I have, I'm actually able to host those SSRS databases in here. So I have my report server and my report server TempDB hosted in managed instance. So that's really cool. I can kind of choose to move the managed instance and then move the SSRS reports later. All right, so let's take a look at some of these reports. So this is one of my reports, and for the purpose of this, we're going to pretend we're still stuck in the year 2020, and it's November because my data for this view that I have goes through November. Now, what we see here is the green line is going to be my sales for the year so far, and these gray dotted lines are going to be the quotas. Now, one interesting thing you might think right off the bat, if I even look between different regions, as my report loads. But what I'm going to see is that the quota is not necessarily consistent. So you can see there's a lot of months where I don't have a quota. And there are even not really any rhyme or reason behind this quota. So what I'm going to say is, let's take a deeper look at how quota is calculated. And for this, I kind of want to use Python. And in order to do that, I can use the machine learning services, which is now available in Managed Instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop to Azure Data Studio. Hopefully you all have seen this tool before. It's a wonderful tool. It's updating at rapid speeds. I really like to use it. And one of the great things about it is this idea of extensions. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and installed the machine learning extension, and so I can show you a little bit about what this is going to do. So I have my managed instance over here, and I can click this manage button, and that's going to bring me to an overview of my managed instance. Now, because of my extension and that I have Python enabled on this managed instance, I also see the machine learning extension tab. Now from here, I can do things directly, which is going to make it a lot easier for me than it was previously. I can do things like manage packages in the database. I can make predictions. I can import or view models that are existing. So this is interesting because I don't necessarily have to train my models on the managed instance that I have. Maybe I'm training on SQL Server on-prem. Maybe I'm training in Azure SQL Edge. Maybe I'm training in something completely different, but I want to leverage that model here, and that's something I can now easily do. I can also see information to learn more. So if I want to get started with the machine learning extension or understand how machine learning services in Managed Instance works, I can see more information and even some video tutorials. This is a video of me if I wanted to hear myself talk some more, or some other members of our team talking about machine learning in Managed Instance and SQL Server. Okay, so let's hop back to my scenario, right? So I have this weird quota data. I want to take a look at it using Python. So I'm going to hop over to a Python notebook that I already created. I'm not going to go through the notebook because we do that a long time and you guys don't really care about that. But what we have here is I'm just doing some data analysis now in Python, which I can do really easily. Another thing I wanted to just call out super briefly is Azure Data Studio, like I mentioned, is updating at lightning speed. So one of the more recent updates, although it's not that recent anymore, is the ability to not have to use Markdown if I don't want to. So you can see here that I can basically edit these things by just highlighting, just using normal editing experiences. I can remove bolds or add bolds. I can also highlight. And one of the cool things is I can even paste in screenshots. So here I've pasted in a screenshot. I didn't have to go store the file down somewhere and try to figure out how to reference it using Markdown. So again, we hear your feedback and we're implementing that as fast as we can. And I would say the team's going really fast. But for our specific problem, I basically went and looked at some of the data and identified that, yes, we are missing a good amount of quota values. And if I look at 2018 and 2019, and you see I'm just looking at sales and quota together, it doesn't really seem to have a good reason for why the quota is what it is. So what we can do is try to use Python and packages I already know, like sklearn, to actually make a model that's going to create a better idea or model for what quota should be. So once I'm happy with the model, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. What I can do is I can use a stored procedure. So here I've switched to a SQL notebook. And I can use a stored procedure to actually train the model. So I can execute this generate model stored procedure to output a trained model. And then I'm going to store that model into a table. So here, what you're actually seeing is that serialized Python model. Now, once I have the model, what I can do is I can create another stored procedure that's actually going to make new predictions on data that it hasn't seen before. So what I can do is then execute that new stored procedure and insert the results into a new table or an existing table. Now, if I take a look at the quota, what I'm going to see is the original quota. So you see those null values. There are lots of null values. And then I'm going to see this adjusted quota. Now, this is the predictions that I've made with that model. And you can see we, at least at first glance, we don't have any null values. And we can take a look and see how it tracks. Now, once I have this, of course, I need to update my SSRS. And I've done that in advance just to help with time's sake. But what I might also do is try to import it into Power BI online. So what you can see here is I've actually gone ahead and done that. And now what you can see is hopefully a better idea of the actual adjusted quota and adjusted variance, and get a better prediction on how we might want to try to meet our goals for the rest of the year. So that's just one example of actually a lot of different things. So what we saw is we saw SSRS. We saw how we have those new images for SSRS and SSAS. We saw Azure SQL Managed Instance, how you can host your SSRS databases there. We saw the machine learning services for Python specifically running in a managed instance, as well as the machine learning extension. So a lot of stuff that we saw in this demo. I hope it was useful. Again, I'm going to share lots of resources in that blog that I just posted so that you can learn more about it. All right, so we talked about a lot of stuff, but there are more updates that I have to share. So onward and forward. The next update is about Azure Data Share. Now, this is something maybe you've heard about and maybe you haven't, but Azure Data Share is a new service that just went GA, so just became generally available in, I think it was early December. And what this is going to allow you to do is actually share data that's stored in relational databases or data warehouses like Synapse, dedicated SQL pools, former SQL DW, or Azure SQL Database, and easily share that data securely between internal departments, with partners or customers. And really the point of this is to help in collaboration in a secure fashion. So this is really interesting. Again, I'll share more resources so you can actually learn how to do this, learn more about the announcement, and see some blog posts and documentations about how to actually do it. All right, so the next update we have is something that's coming in preview. So what you can see actually in both of these is I'm trying to put in the bottom right whether it's now available, so generally available, or like this next update is in public preview. This update is for transparent data encryption. So TDE is something that's been around in SQL Server for a while, in Azure SQL Database, and Azure SQL Managed Instance, but recently it went into public preview in Hyperscale, specifically with customer-managed keys. So what this means is we're basically adding that bring your own key, or BYOK, support for TDE in Azure SQL Database Hyperscale. This has been something a lot of customers like to manage their own keys. You can either let us manage them, or you can manage them yourself with something like BYOK. So this is something that's going to be available for you, and it's also going to give that extra level of assurance for our government and financial type of customers. Again, I'll share in more information on how to learn more and how to get that set up in the blog. All right, so the next update that I have, and this is an exciting one, is private link for Azure SQL Data Sync on Azure SQL Database. So there's a lot to unpack here. Azure SQL Data Sync has been around for a while. Private link is a little bit newer capability that's available for Azure SQL Database today. So this idea of both of these things together and how they might work, I thought it would be interesting to do a data exposed exclusive. So in this exclusive, I'm actually going to bring on a program manager from our team, Mara Stu, to talk to us a little bit more about Azure SQL Data Sync and private link and how these things go together. So Mara, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And hi everyone. I'm Mara. I'm a current PM in Azure SQL, and one of the projects that I'm working on is SQL Data Sync. I'm very excited to tell you more about what we're doing at Sync. So let's get started. Let's talk a bit more about what SQL Data Sync does at a high level. So SQL Data Sync allows you to easily synchronize data across multiple databases, and these databases can be in Azure SQL, SQL Server on-prem, and SQL Server on virtual machines. So SQL Data Sync is focused around the concept of a sync group, and basically a sync group is a group of databases that the user wants to synchronize. And every sync group has one hub database that has to be in Azure SQL and one or more member databases. So there are some key properties of a sync group that are quite relevant to discuss. First, we have a sync schema, which is basically specifies what are the tables that will be synchronized within a database. Then we have the sync direction, which defines whether we want a one-way sync or a bidirectional sync. So the fact that SQL Data Sync does bidirectional sync is quite special, and users find it highly valuable. And this means that the users can set up sync from member to hub, hub to member, or both in the case of bidirectional sync. Then we have the sync frequency, and this defines how frequently the sync activity will be triggered. So, for instance, you can turn on automatic sync in the Azure portal, and you can set up the sync frequency as low as once every 30 seconds and as high as up to 30 days. And lastly, we have the conflict resolving policy, which defines what should happen when we have a conflict on data modification. So what are the changes that should be preserved? And here the user has two options. You can either select member wins or hub wins. So if you select the hub wins policy, basically you're telling sync that the changes in the hub database should always be preserved and override those in the member. And if you select the member wins policy, the changes in the member should override the changes in the hub. If you have more than one member database, the final value will be declared based on which member syncs first. Moving onwards. So as you can see here, sync is centered around the hub and spoke topology. As I was previously mentioning, every single group in sync has one hub database and one or more member databases. And it's really important to highlight that the member databases only sync with the hub databases. So more specifically, changes from the hub are downloaded to the member databases, and then changes from the member databases are uploaded to the hub. As we can see in figure 1 in this slide, we have only one member database and one hub database, and they sync between themselves together. That's quite easy to understand. And moving on to multiple member databases, which is the other option, as you can see, they all sync through the hub database. That's the model behind sync. It's worth mentioning that it is required that the hub database and Azure SQL is an Azure SQL database, while the member databases can be on Azure SQL, on-prem SQL Server, and SQL Server on virtual machines. And now let's understand more about some of the common scenarios in which users decide to use SQL Data Sync. So we have 3 scenarios that we'd like to discuss. First of all, we have hybrid data synchronization. And this basically keeps the data synchronized between your databases in SQL Server and Azure SQL to enable hybrid applications. This might be valuable for customers who are moving to the cloud and would like to ensure that the databases that they have on-premise and on the cloud remain synchronized. For instance, after migrating to Azure SQL Data Sync can help you ensure that the source database and the target remain synchronized even after the migration process. Then we have distributed applications, and these allow you to synchronize data across databases that have different workloads. For instance, you might have a production database and another database that has an analytics workload, and you want to keep those in sync. And finally, you have globally distributed applications, which keep databases in different regions from around the world synchronized. And now we're very excited to discuss one of the new features that we have just launched in public preview in SQL Data Sync, Private Link. So basically, Private Link allows you to choose a service managed private endpoint to set up a secure connection between the sync service and the hub and member databases during the data synchronization process. A service managed private point is basically just a private IP address within a specific virtual network and the subnet, which is owned by Microsoft. So it's worth noting that the member and the hub databases must be hosted in Azure, and in the same cloud type. So for instance, both in the public cloud or both in the government cloud. And users must manually approve the service managed private endpoint for SQL Data Sync during the sync configuration process. You can do that within the private endpoint connection section in the Azure portal or through PowerShell, depending on how you prefer to deploy private link. So once the service managed private endpoint is approved by the customer, all the communication between the sync service and the member and hub databases happens over this private link that is very secure. And it's worth noting that existing sync groups can be updated to have this feature enabled in case you already have been using sync so far. And that's pretty much what I have so far, Anna. I'm going back to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mara. You know, I just have one question because I learned a lot in that and I kind of need to digest it and go read some more. But for viewers that are kind of new to Azure SQL Data Sync or new to Private Link or new to both, or just new to this idea of this new thing that's in public preview, what do you advise them to do to like go get started? What's a good first step?
Yes, so we're happy to share some links right now. So we have 3 resources. One, if you want to learn more about how SQL Data Sync works in general, we're sharing the public documentation, what is SQL Data Sync, and you can learn more about the technology behind and all the technical aspects. If you want to get started on SQL Data Sync, there are 2 key resources that we're sharing right now as well. One of them is on setting up SQL Data Sync in the Azure portal. We take you through all the steps of setting it up. And the other one is for setting it up in PowerShell. And this applies to both databases in Azure SQL and databases in on-prem, because it works with both.
Awesome. Thanks, Mara. And so that link is in the banner below us right now. And if you want the PowerShell one, just replace Azure Portal with PowerShell, and that should take you to it. In the blog that we will share a link to at the end of this, you'll also have some more references in there. So if you lose this link or you miss this link, don't worry. Awesome. So thanks so much again, Mara. I know people are really going to enjoy checking this out. So thanks again. And we're looking forward to hopefully having you back on the show sometime soon.
Thank you.
All right. So that was Mara. That was great. A great change of pace, I think, for you all to get a break from listening to me ramble on about all these updates. Mara's great. So glad to have her on the show. And with that, we're going to move forward and talk about other things. So we're going to start by talking about blogs and videos. Now, I got to be honest, when I was starting this, so this is the first time we're doing this, I was looking at all the different blogs that we have and all the different videos that we have. And really, we release a ton of content every month. So I hope that in kind of bringing them all in one place and giving you the highlights, you can decide and stay up to date on what's new, what you want to go deeper on, and what you know about but don't necessarily want to go deeper on, but you know that it happened. So hopefully this helps. So we're going to start with videos. Of course, I'm a little biased because I want to talk about Data Exposed because that's why we're here. That's why you're here. So let's talk about Data Exposed. Now, this is Data Exposed Live, what you're tuning into now, whether it's live or you're watching it later. But we also release episodes on Thursdays that are not live. They're meant to be like shorter, snackable type of videos that you can consume related to very specific topics. So in the past month, so I'm going to talk about the videos we released in December. Now, the first video, and actually Amit came on and did 3 videos about SQL Server and Azure VM. These are all 3 really interesting videos. Only one landed in December, and that's why I have it listed here. The other 2 landed in November, and he really talks about some of the licensing benefits that you get when you move from SQL Server on-prem to SQL Server in an Azure virtual machine. And they're kind of mind-blowing, some of the benefits that have been around that a lot of people just didn't know about. So I'd definitely go check this out to make sure you're getting the most out of moving to SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine, also getting the most out of Azure Hybrid Benefit. And if you haven't moved, maybe some reasons to think about when you think about, even if you're just only going to move some of it, if you're working in a hybrid scenario, there are some benefits to be had using Azure. So that's a great set of videos, and this one as well to check out. The next video was actually a series of 2 videos. make this a little bigger so you can see it. 2 videos I shot with Arvind, who is a wonderful program manager on our team. He has great expertise in things like DevOps and CI/CD. So he came on the show and he talked to us about DevOps. This was great, even if you're not familiar with DevOps, just to get like the 101 on what DevOps is and how it relates to Azure SQL. And then we did a follow-up video where he showed us how to use Azure pipelines and other tools like GitHub Actions for your Azure SQL deployments when you're leveraging DevOps type of technologies or can't think of the word, ways of operating and doing development. We'll go with that. So that's a great set of 2 videos. Definitely check those ones out. The next one was an MVP episode. So once to twice a month, we release MVP episodes with our Microsoft Most Valuable Professionals. This first one was with Chrissy Lemaire. She's the founder of DBA Tools. This was a really cool one because she taught us how to automate DR in SQL Server on-prem. And it was really cool because it took care of all the other things, not just your backup, but also like your users and all your jobs and all the other things that go into making sure you're actually ready for a disaster recovery scenario. And she did a great job. It was such a pleasure to have her on the show. So definitely go check out her video as well. Then I had the legendary Bob Ward, who you all know as a great friend and colleague of mine, but he came on the show to talk to us about Azure SQL from edge to cloud. And again, this is a short video, but it's a great video because it's very succinct in telling you all the different options that Azure SQL offers today, as well as kind of the shortest what to use when around each of them. So great one to check out as well. Even covers things like Azure SQL Edge, obviously from the title, and Azure Arc. All right, we did release a lot of episodes in December. It was a busy month. The next one we had was with Abhishek, and he's from one of our partner teams, the Azure Data Factory team. He's program manager there. And he came on and talked to us about hybrid data integration with Azure Data Factory. So he talked about how we can use Azure Data Factory and Azure SQL Database, and even information about the different integration runtimes and how it relates to SSIS. So that's a great one to check out. Then we had another MVP come on, Warwick Rudd, and this was a great video. It's the A to S of Azure Data Studio, and he showed me things I didn't even know were possible in Azure Data Studio. So if you're either looking to get more into Azure Data Studio, looking to be sold on Azure Data Studio, this is a great video to kind of see a ton of things all in one spot. And finally, Kate Smith, a program manager on our team. She's been working with me for a while on a series of 6 videos. And basically, the purpose of these videos is to talk about Elastic Jobs in very small, bite-sized pieces. So we have 6 videos, whether or not you want to follow the portal track, so how to do it using the Azure portal and T-SQL, or the track that goes through using PowerShell. We have different videos, and now all of her videos are released. The 6th one, I believe, released in January. That's why it's not included here. So lots of things to see here as far as videos on episodes of Data Exposed. You can expect those to continue. But, I thought, why not? It's our first one. Let's throw in another demo. So when I started working with Amit, and Amit's team works a lot on SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine, I actually started learning a lot more about SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine and the things that we're doing to make it easier for you to configure this and migrate from your on-prem environment. So I thought I'd take a moment, and this isn't like a super formal demo, but I just wanted to show you the deployment experience, as this is something I recommend you go and play with yourself, because it's a great way to kind of see some of the things we're working on, and you don't even have to spend any money to see it. So let's switch so you can see that. All right, so we're back in my virtual machine, except I'm going to switch over to the Azure portal. And what I've done here is, actually, I'll go back to this Azure SQL Blade. So this is really great because you can see all your Azure SQL resources, whether they're VMs, databases, or managed instances, all in one place. Elastic Pools, they're all here. But what I like is I can hit Add. And so now I have the 3 main SQL deployment options in Azure. And this is great because not only does it put it all in one place, but it's also going to give me a brief what to use when for each option underneath the options. So this is really useful. And the best part, I think, of course, this is my opinion, is for SQL virtual machines, because what you can do, And before this blade, you had to go look for all these images, but all the images are right here. So whether you want your SQL Server 2019 on Windows Server 2019, your different editions, or maybe you're using SUSE Celeste or Ubuntu or Red Hat, all those images are here for you to pick which one you want, which SQL Server version you want, all the way back to SQL Server 2008 R2 SP3 on Windows Server 2008 R2. So this is awesome. It's just going to help you get started. For this, I just want to show you SQL Server 2019 on Windows 2019. Keep it vanilla here. Now, there's a few things I have to fill out. I'm going to skip them because I just want to show you some of the options. You can see I can also see all the images here. And for size, now this is one of the first things we're doing to help you, is we're actually putting your recently used sizes and also recommending some sizes. And if you need more detail, you can see there's a ton of information on what images are available and what are most used and what you might want to use. So for this, I'm just going to use this one and take a note at this price. This is a pretty hefty VM, but what I want to show you is if you're migrating and you already have a Windows Server license with Azure Hybrid Benefit, so I'm just going to confirm I do so I can show you what it looks like. You can see this price is going to update and it's automatically going to decrease my costs by about over 30% just by using my existing licenses that I'm already paying for. So that's an awesome thing you don't want to miss out on. Now there are some other settings that you have here through the deployment experience, but I just want to show you the SQL Server ones and really how we're trying to make it easier for you to configure this, because there's a lot of things, as you all know, to configure when you're setting up a machine to run SQL Server. So right off the bat, we're giving you some options around security and networking, as well as the ports. If you want to enable SQL Auth, you can do that here. If you want to leverage Azure Key Vault integration, you can supply that information here. But the really interesting thing, at least in my opinion, is this storage optimization configuration. Now, this is where we're really doing some heavy lifting for you, in my opinion. So let's kind of walk through these different options. So first at the top, I have this storage optimization. So I can say, you know, in general, I'm doing transactional processing, or I'm doing data warehousing, or this is just a general type of workload. And what this is going to do is then set certain trace flags for me so I can get the most out of. So I'm kind of set up for that type of workload. So I'm just going to set transactional processing. And then you can see we've set some defaults for data storage, log storage, and TimpDB storage. Now, these are based on years and years of SQL Server best practices. So you can pretty much rely on these, but if you want to change anything, you have the option here, depending on the VM you choose. You can change your storage. Right now it's a P30. You can also change the number of disks for your data storage. So for example, if I want to have 3, I actually am going to get a warning before I deploy saying, hey, you might not get the performance you're expecting because using this number of disks is going to basically exceed the capacity that you have with your given VM. So it's great to have this warning up front as opposed to just configure it like this and then have to troubleshoot later why it's not working the way you might think it's working. So we're doing all those checks in the background to see what the maximum throughputs are. So now I can decide, okay, do I need to go get a bigger VM or do I want to use less disks? For this, I'm just going to say I just need 2 disks. You can see even with 2 disks here, I'm going to get 10,000 IOPS and pretty high throughput. So this is good for a lot of workloads, and for this imaginary workload I have, I'm going to say it's good. For log storage, again, I can see is kind of interesting things. Again, the best practices are set up. So by default, I'm using a separate drive for the logs. We can see where the log location is, the disk type, other info here, and finally TimpDB. So again, you know, I've said this a few times, but we're setting this up according to best practices. So we're going to put that drive, the TimpDB drive, in a different location. Now, this is interesting because this is going to be ephemeral, of course, but that's okay because when SQL Server restarts, you know, TimpDB gets cleared anyways. But one of the great things that this does for you is it's actually going to create the job that's going to reset this up for you in the case that it goes away or SQL Server restarts. So that's really awesome. Otherwise, you would have to figure out how to do it yourself. And you all who know me know I don't have 20 years of SQL Server experience. So to me, this is great, really going to eliminate a lot of the headache for me personally, and I think for a lot of you as well. So that's really the cool part about, in my opinion, the new storage configuration and the deploy experience. There's also some things around automated patching. So if you want to configure automated patching, you can set up a maintenance schedule as well as a duration there. You can also set up automated backup here. So you basically just connect it to a storage account, say how long you want to retain those backups, if you want to encrypt them, if you want to back up the system databases, so your master model and MSDB, and if you want to configure the backup schedule. So you can do an automated, or you can even say how frequently you want to do it. So you have a lot of granularity, but a lot of things that we're just going to configure for you and help you get set up right off the bat. And you can even enable our services, so machine learning services we talked about for MI, you can enable it with just one click of a button. No more going through those setup screens and waiting an hour for everything to configure, however long it takes. So this is just, you know, I thought it was kind of cool to throw in something I learned about VMs recently. Now, I went ahead and I deployed this for something else. So what I can do, it's the same VM, basically, is I can go into the disk and I can see how the data disks were configured. So note, I didn't have to configure this myself. And I'm even taking advantage of host caching, and it's set up correctly. Now, if I were to go into this virtual machine, which I'm not going to do today, but if I were to go into this virtual machine, what I would see is that it's actually configuring all the settings for the VM correctly as well. So for example, since we're using this, you have to set up the number of columns to be a very specific number. In this case, you need those number of columns to be 2, and this is going to do that for you. So again, kind of a not necessarily related to a new announcement, but something that's new in the portal that you might not have heard of. So I wanted to share it with you all. Hope it was interesting. Leave us a comment, leave a question, let us know if you've seen that before, what you think of it, or other things you might want to see. Oh, one more thing I could show you. Here I am going off the rails. What you can do is, since it is a SQL virtual machine, you can actually go into the SQL Server configuration, and you can see all the settings that you've configured. And there's even in preview the ability, if you set up your domain correctly, to do a new always-on availability group or a new Windows Server failover cluster using a wizard. So I think that's pretty cool. From the little I know about setting these things up, they're a big pain, and so any help that Azure can provide in doing this on a big scale is really awesome. All right, so we are going to continue to talk about some blogs. These are some blogs that hit the Azure blog. So this is a pretty big all-up Microsoft type of blog. And the few that I wanted to highlight is this one, 5 ways to save costs by running .NET apps on Azure. I'll let you all read the details of this. Again, I put it in my blog. But the big learning here is that if you're running your .NET apps on Azure, you can save up to 54%. And we do these studies through a third party called GigaOM. So they do all the performance testing and benchmarking for us. But you can see here the #1 way to save costs by running .NET apps on Azure is taking advantage of that Azure hybrid benefit for SQL Server. So more details in the link that I'll provide, but I thought this was an interesting one you all might want to check out. The next blog I wanted to just mention quickly is Microsoft was named a leader in Gartner's 2020 Magic Quadrant. So what does that mean? Gartner is another third-party organization that looks at a bunch of the companies in the industry. And what you can see is Microsoft is in the top right box, which is the best box to be in, because that means you see on the x-axis completeness of vision is higher than most of the companies, and also on the y-axis ability to execute is one of the highest ones there. So this is great to be in the Magic Quadrant of leaders and visionaries and challengers. So very cool to see that. The final big announcement that I have, and I'm sure, hopefully you all have seen these, and if not, I'm excited to break the news. They're not exactly related to Azure SQL or SQL Server, but they're very much related to Azure Data. So I wanted to mention, in case you missed it, Azure Synapse Analytics went GA in early December. We actually had a whole big launch with called Microsoft Create Data. We had a day, actually a few day long talks with some people. Check that out. And then in preview, we announced Azure Purview. Now, this is going to be a game changer for data governance. So this is something you want to learn more about. Don't have time to talk about it now, but wanted to let you all know that it's something you should check out. Okay, so now we're going to move towards the tech community blogs. The first one is the SQL Server tech community blog, and you can see, just taking a glance at this, that we release a lot of new stuff. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier. So you can see replication management pack, SSAS management pack, an update. So you have 2 updates in there about management packs for replication. This new thing called AD Util, which is going to help you configure AD auth for SQL on Linux and containers. This is a huge thing, by the way, something people have been asking for a while, and this is a way to do that in much more ease, with much more ease. SQL Server Big Data Clusters CU8, so cumulative update 8. Some of the updates that happen related to big data clusters in that CU, you're going to want to check that out. Some other drivers that have been updated. So, you know, a lot of things that are released in December, so definitely check in and pick the things that are relevant for you, right? You don't necessarily need to read all of these blogs, but pick the ones that, you know, you might want to learn more about, like the early technical preview of the JDBC driver 9.1. So that's SQL Server Tech Community. For the Azure SQL Tech Community, we released a few blogs. We've talked about some of them already. Mara talked to us about Private Link for SQL Data Sync. I mentioned this TDE with BYOKey for Hyperscale, so you can learn more about those. One I wanted to briefly highlight is how to improve your Azure SQL performance by up to 800%. So basically, we did this performance benchmark test. Well, we didn't do it. Again, we work with a third party called GigaOM, and they run these testing. Basically, they were trying to see if you could get an increase in performance by using Azure SQL Database plus Azure Cache for Redis. So basically, for this test, just to cover it very briefly, is GigaOM created a sample application based on the real-world example of people putting things into their online shopping cart. Now, this test was designed to be realistic, but also featured the benefits of caching. So the 2 test cases were basically Azure SQL Database alone, which is, you know, a great database for this sort of things in general, and at various vCore levels, and then also with using Azure SQL Database and Azure Cache for Redis. So, you know, the results kind of speak to themselves. Definitely check this out. It's a really interesting study. But what they found was that the throughput performance increased by over 800%. So that's that blue bar all the way on the right. So using these 2 things together is going to be great if you're leveraging caching, as well as the latency. So of course, you want lower latency is going to be better. But all the way on the right, you see that combination of using the smallest SQL DB plus Redis, and you can see the latency goes down by over 1,000%. So that's a cool blog to check out. Now, one more set of blogs is the Azure SQL Devs Corner. So this is located in the Dev blog section, and you'll get links to all these. So you'll start to learn more about the different blogs that we produce and which ones are there. But this one is more focused on developers. So there were a few blogs related to the seasons of serverless, which was more Microsoft developers wide, not just Azure SQL Database. But a few members of our team, actually Drew and Davide, they actually worked on, you know, completing some of these challenges using Azure SQL Database serverless. So if you're interested in learning more about serverless or developing with Azure SQL DB, these are some good blogs to check out. You can even try them yourself. Auto-scaling with Azure SQL Hyperscale, Davide has released a sample that really helps you. It's not automatically in the sense that with serverless, we just do auto-scaling, but it's very close to that. You can set it up very easily. I've used the sample myself. It's easy to set up. You can even set it up for like a business critical scaling, general purpose scaling. So that's a great one. You can also learn about from a real world scenario, converting a back to a backpack for importing into Azure SQL Database. and reading with Azure SQL using Synapse SQL external tables. Sorry, that was a mouthful for me. But this is a really interesting blog. I think this one was written by Jovan. It was really great, really kind of expands your mind on thinking about Azure SQL and Synapse together. So great one to check out as well. And then there was this last one about programmatically parsing T-SQL. Okay, so again, don't want you all to get overwhelmed. There's a lot of blogs. So just take this in, check out the blog that I put all the blogs in, and you can pick what's relevant to you. I did want to call out the Azure Database Support blog because what they do is these folks actually work with customers every day on some really, big problems that customers have, and they put their lessons learned here. And I want to give a shout out to Jose Manuel Gerardo Diaz, and I'm sorry, I probably said your name wrong, but he puts out a ton of lesson learned. You can see that we're up to 155. So these are really awesome. There's some other awesome tips and tricks in here for your real world production type of workloads, and even if you're just playing around. So that's all the blogs, all of them, because there's quite a few. This next segment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Marisa on and let Marisa introduce herself, and I'll pass it off to you. Thanks, Marisa.
Great. Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa Brazili. I am a program manager here at Microsoft, and I want to tell you a little bit about the events that Anna and the team are presenting this month. So the first up on 110, which is actually Sunday, Anna will be at the Multi-Cloud for You meetup, where she'll be talking about Azure SQL Database networking, using private link, and connecting with PaaS. And again, let me mention that registration links for really any of these events and resources will be in that blog that Anna talked about. She'll give you that URL at the end of the presentation. Next step is on 120, the Azure webinar series will be hosting a webinar called The 4 Ways to Take Your Data Security to the Next Level. Again, you can register for that, and that's put on by our marketing team here, so that should be great. And then at the end of the month, on 129, C# Corner, we'll have their SQL Server virtual conference. And actually, a bunch of people will be there from our team. Anna will be there, Mara will be there, Bob Ward, Buck Woody, Davide, Drew, Julie. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but there will be a bunch of Microsoft folks there represented. So don't miss that one. And Anna mentioned this earlier, but this is the first Data Exposed episode we've done this year, and we'll do one every Wednesday. So next week, we're starting with a deep dive with enterprise data integration simplified with Azure Data Factory. The following week, there's a new series called Something Old, Something New, and that's with Buck Woody. They'll be talking about, I think the title of this one is 2 Data Scientists Walk into a Bar. What are the odds? So that should be super exciting with them. And then the last Wednesday on 127, we'll have our February 2021 news and updates. And I just want to put a special mention out for our Data Exposed special, which is the first of its kind as well. And we on February 3rd. And it is an event called Around the Clock with Azure SQL and Azure Data Factory. And both teams are combining for this event with the idea that Azure Data Factory can do a lot of things, but does Azure SQL really well. And you can register for that event too at aka.ms/aroundtheclock. So we're lots of places this month. And as always, there's things that pop up, and you can get the most up-to-date information on our Twitter site at Azure SQL on Twitter to find out where we're at next. Thanks, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Marisa. That was great. Marisa helps with this show immensely. She's really the reason it all happens. So she's the magic behind the scenes. So it's really exciting to actually get you on and bring you on and let us see you. Awesome. Thanks, Marisa.
Thanks.
All right. So we are coming near the end of time, but I have just a few more things I want to show you. Firstly, every month, I will start highlighting a module in Microsoft Learn. So if you want to learn with me, you can kind of learn one module a month. And for the first month, I thought it would be great to learn more about Azure SQL. So this is the first module in the Azure SQL Fundamentals learning path. So definitely check this out. You'll get the 411 on the latest information on what Azure SQL is, what it includes, and all of that. And finally, every month, I'm going to do a pick of the month. So this is the first one. We'll see how it goes. But my first pick of the month is some books. So there are 2 books I wanted to highlight here. The first is Azure SQL Revealed. It was written by Bob Ward. This was an exciting one because it's really meant to help SQL Server professionals translate their knowledge to Azure SQL. So I think this is a great one. If you know Bob, he's a wonderful author. He's written, I think this is the 3rd book he's written in 3 years. I told him he's got to slow down. But this is a great book. Definitely check it out. As well as Practical Azure SQL Database for Modern Developers. This is another book that I worked on actually with a few legendary program managers from our team, Davide, Silvano, Sanjay, and Jovan. So definitely check that book out. This one's great for developers, especially if you're a little bit new to SQL. This is going to help you get ramped up. So that's a great one. So we are at time, and the final thing I want to share with you all is the blog. So this is the link to the blog. If you go to aka.ms/news update, you can learn about all of these things. Everything I just showed you has a link associated with it and a blurb associated with it, so you can go and dive deeper into the things that are most relevant for you. As we wrap up, you know, I really just want to say thank you. I know this is the first one, and I hope we'll get better at this over time. I hope it's been useful for you all. We're really excited to have you here. We're really excited to be here every week. Please put your comments and questions in the chat. Let's see. We have a few questions, which I think I can show. We have, if you want to stick around. This one question, which I love, is I'm new to SQL. I want to learn SQL for free. Check the blog that we just posted, aka.ms/news update. And what we'll do is we will, in that blog, you'll see that introduction to Azure SQL. I think that's a great place to start. And then there are lots of modules after that. And that's great because you can actually get hands-on for free using the sandbox in Microsoft Learn. And yes, we can share the resources in the chat. We're doing that right now. Thank you all so much. I am going to sign off. But again, if you like this video, please like this video. Leave us a comment wherever you're posting from. Be sure to tune in next week. And we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.